The saw bit into pine wood with a rhythm that had become automatic over the past 72 hours. Ivan Petrov's hands moved mechanically, muscle memory guiding each cut, while his exhausted mind drifted somewhere between consciousness and sleep. He was working on soldier number 463, a simple wooden silhouette that would soon join the others standing silent guard on a ridge overlooking the crossroads at Tukums. Dawn light filtered through the barn where Ivan worked, illuminating sawdust that covered every surface like snow. His hands were blistered and bleeding, his back screamed with pain from 3 nights of constant labor, and his eyes burned from lack of sleep. But the work continued because the alternative was unthinkable. Without these wooden soldiers, the German advance would sweep through Tukums, cutting off the Soviet retreat route and trapping 30,000 men in a pocket they couldn't escape. Ivan was 56 years old, a master carpenter from Riga who had built furniture, cabinets, and church altars before the war destroyed his normal life. Now he built soldiers, not real soldiers. Those were dying by the thousands on battlefields across Latvia as the Wehrmacht pushed deeper into Soviet-held territory. Ivan built the illusion of soldiers, and if his illusion was convincing enough, it might save more lives than any real battalion could. The commission had come 3 days ago from Major Dmitry Kozlov, a Soviet officer whose unit was desperately trying to delay German forces long enough for the main Soviet armies to establish defensive positions farther east. Kozlov's battalion had been reduced to barely 200 men through constant fighting. They held Tukums and its vital crossroads, but German reconnaissance had reported their weakness. A full-strength German regiment was preparing to attack, and 200 exhausted Soviet soldiers couldn't hope to stop them. "I need you to make it look like we have reinforcements," Kozlov had told Ivan, spreading maps across the Carpenter's workbench. "The Germans know we're weak. If they think fresh troops have arrived, they might hesitate, might delay their attack long enough for our reinforcements to actually arrive. Can you do this?" Ivan had studied the maps, calculating sight lines and distances. The German observation posts were positioned 3 kilometers from the Soviet defensive line, far enough that details would be impossible to see, close enough that large formations would be clearly visible. "I can make silhouettes," Ivan had replied slowly. "Wooden figures that look like soldiers from a distance. But I'll need materials, time, and help." Kozlov had shaken his head. "No help available. Every man I have is needed on the defensive line. Materials I can provide. We have lumber from demolished buildings. Time you have 3 nights. In 3 days, the Germans attack whether you're ready or not. 3 nights to build 500 soldiers." Ivan had calculated the mathematics immediately. 500 figures meant constructing 1 complete soldier every 8 minutes, assuming he worked without rest. Impossible for any normal man. But Ivan Petrov was not normal. He was a master craftsman driven by the knowledge that failure meant death for thousands. He had simplified the design ruthlessly. Each soldier was a flat silhouette cut from planks, roughly man height, shaped to show a head, shoulders, and the suggestion of a rifle. No details, no features, just the outline that a German observer would expect to see. Pine wood because it cut easily. Simple vertical posts to hold each figure upright. Assembly line methods that would horrify any true craftsman, but that allowed for rapid production. The first night Ivan had cut lumber and created templates. The second night he had begun production, his saw singing through it in endless repetition. Now, on the third night, he was approaching completion. 463 soldiers stood in the barn, ready for deployment. 37 more to go. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought had failed. Outside the barn, the sound of artillery rumbled like distant thunder. The Germans were probing Soviet defensive positions, testing for weaknesses, preparing for the main assault. Ivan tried not to think about the men dying out there while he played Carpenter in relative safety. His contribution was different, but no less vital. Those wooden soldiers had to be convincing enough to make German commanders think twice about their attack. Major Kozlov had been specific about deployment. The wooden soldiers would be positioned along the ridge line in company formations, spaced as real troops would space themselves. They would be arranged to suggest recent arrival, some facing forward toward German positions, others in more relaxed poses, as if setting up camp. From 3 kilometers away, German observers would see what appeared to be significant reinforcements preparing for defensive operations. Ivan completed Soldier 463 and began 464. His hands shook with exhaustion, but he forced them steady. Precision mattered. Even a rough silhouette had to be proportionally correct or the illusion would fail. He checked his template, made his cuts, shaped the head and shoulders, notched the base of the support post. 8 minutes. Next soldier. The rhythm continued. By midnight of the third night, Ivan had completed all 500 figures. They stood in rows inside the barn like a silent army waiting for orders. In the lamplight, they looked almost alive, shadows and shapes that suggested humanity, without actually possessing it. Ivan allowed himself 1 hour of rest, collapsing onto a pile of sawdust, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion. At 2 o'clock hours, Kozlov arrived with a work detail of 20 soldiers pulled from the defensive line. "We have 4 hours until dawn," the major said quietly, looking at Ivan's wooden army with something approaching awe. That's when German reconnaissance flights begin. Everything must be in position before first light. The deployment began immediately. Soldiers carried the wooden figures up the ridge line in batches, working by moonlight without lamps or flashlights that might alert German observers. Ivan supervised the positioning, using his understanding of perspective and sight lines to create the most convincing arrangement. Each wooden soldier had to stand at the correct height, had to be spaced properly from his neighbors, had contributed to the overall illusion of a battalion preparing for combat. The work proceeded with desperate urgency as the hours before dawn ticked away. Ivan moved among the wooden soldiers like a theater director arranging actors on a stage, adjusting positions by centimeters, ensuring each silhouette contributed to the overall deception. The ridge line offered perfect positioning, elevated enough to be clearly visible from German observation posts, but distant enough that fine details would be lost in atmospheric haze and distance. "Place this company here, facing northwest," Ivan instructed, pointing to a section of the ridge. "Space them 4 meters apart, stagger formation. Make it look like they're preparing defensive positions." The real Soviet soldiers followed his directions precisely, understanding that their lives might depend on how convincing these wooden figures appeared. Kozlov watched the deployment with a tactical eye, occasionally suggesting adjustments based on military doctrine. Real troops wouldn't bunch together like that. Spread them wider. And those figures on the left, turn them slightly as if they're watching the flanks. German observers will expect proper military positioning. By 5:30 hours, with dawn less than an hour away, all 500 wooden soldiers stood in formation along the ridge. From Ivan's position, they looked absurdly fake. Clearly wooden, obviously immobile, a child's art project rather than actual soldiers. But distance was a powerful ally. Ivan climbed to a spot 300 meters away and looked back at his creation through borrowed binoculars. The transformation was remarkable. At 300 meters, the wooden silhouettes began to blend together, individual figures becoming part of a larger formation. Details disappeared into shadow and distance. What remained was the unmistakable outline of a military unit. Rows of soldiers standing in tactical formation, exactly what a German observer would expect to see if Soviet reinforcements had arrived during the night. "It works," Ivan said softly, lowering the binoculars. From the German observation posts at 3 kilometers, they'll see a battalion. They won't see individual soldiers clearly enough to know they're wooden. Kozlov nodded, satisfied. "Now we wait. German reconnaissance flights begin at dawn. If your soldiers are convincing, the intelligence reports will reach German commanders by mid-morning. Then we'll see if they hesitate." The sun rose over Latvia, illuminating the ridgeline where 500 wooden soldiers stood silent watch. The first German reconnaissance aircraft appeared at 6:15 hours, a Fiesler Storch observation plane flying a standard patrol route along the front lines. Ivan watched it circle, knowing the observer was photographing everything visible from altitude. The wooden soldiers cast long shadows in the early morning light, shadows that made them appear even more solid and real. 3 more reconnaissance flights followed over the next 2 hours. Each aircraft spent time circling the ridge, clearly interested in what appeared to be a significant concentration of Soviet forces. Ivan allowed himself a moment of hope. The Germans were noticing. The deception was working exactly as planned. At German 6th Army headquarters in Jelgava, 30 kilometers west of Tukums, intelligence officers were developing reconnaissance photographs in a makeshift darkroom. Oberst Friedrich Weber, responsible for tactical intelligence, studied the images with growing concern. The photographs clearly showed a Soviet battalion positioned along the ridge line east of Tukums, approximately 500 men in defensive formation. When did these troops arrive? Weber asked his assistant, comparing the new photographs to images from the previous day. Yesterday the ridge had been empty. Today it was occupied by what appeared to be a fresh battalion. Unknown, her Oberst, no movement was detected during the night, but they're definitely there now. The formation suggests they arrived sometime after midnight and deployed before dawn. The assistant pointed to specific formations in the photograph. Standard Soviet defensive positioning. They're preparing to resist our planned attack. Weber studied the images carefully. Something bothered him about the photographs, though he couldn't immediately identify what. The Soviet positions looked correct. The spacing was appropriate. The formation was textbook. But there was an odd stillness to the image, a lack of the small movements and activities that usually characterize military positions. Has anyone reported seeing actual movement in these positions? Weber asked. Soldiers moving around, vehicles, activity of any kind? The assistant checked his notes. The reconnaissance flights report the positions as static. No observed movement during the 2-hour observation period. But that's not unusual for troops in defensive positions during daylight hours. They're probably maintaining cover and concealment protocols. Weber wasn't convinced, but he had no concrete evidence to dispute what the photographs clearly showed. Continue surveillance. I want updated images every 2 hours. And inform General Hartmann that Soviet forces at Tukums appear to have been reinforced with approximately 1 battalion overnight. This changes our attack calculations. The intelligence report reached General Hartmann within the hour. He studied it while eating breakfast. His experienced eye recognizing the significance immediately. His regiment had been preparing to attack what they believed was a weakened Soviet force of approximately 200 men. The sudden appearance of 500 additional troops changed the tactical situation dramatically. If they reinforce Tukums, they're planning to hold it. Hartmann observed to his chief of staff. That suggests the position has strategic value we may have underestimated. It also suggests our intelligence about Soviet weakness in this sector may have been deliberately fed to us. We could be walking into a trap. The chief of staff nodded. Do we proceed with the attack as planned, or do we reconsider? Hartmann made a command decision that would validate everything Ivan Petrov had worked for during those 3 desperate nights. We postpone. I'm not sending my men against a prepared defensive position with unknown enemy strength. Continue reconnaissance. Probe their positions with artillery. Let's see how they respond before we commit to a full assault. Back at Tukums, Major Kozlov received reports that German artillery was ranging its positions, but no infantry attack was developing. They're hesitating, he told Ivan, who had remained with the Soviet forces to maintain his wooden soldiers. Your deception is buying us time. Every hour we delay them is another hour for our real reinforcements to arrive. Ivan felt relief mixed with anxiety. The deception was working, but it was also fragile. If German ground patrols got close enough to examine the wooden soldiers, the entire trick would collapse. If the Germans decided to simply bombard the ridge line with artillery, they would discover the figures were wooden the moment shells started hitting them. The illusion only worked as long as the Germans maintained their distance and relied on aerial reconnaissance. Throughout the day, Ivan made small adjustments to his wooden army. He moved figures slightly between German reconnaissance flights, creating the impression of troops shifting positions and conducting normal military activities. He added new elements, wooden crates that suggested supply dumps, rough frameworks that could be interpreted as tents or equipment shelters. Each addition reinforced the illusion that this was a real military position occupied by real soldiers. By evening of the first day, the German attack had not materialized. Kozlov's scouts reported that German forces were repositioning, apparently preparing for a different approach. They're taking you seriously, Kozlov told Ivan with a grim smile. 500 wooden soldiers are making an entire German regiment reconsider their tactics. That's more effective than most real soldiers achieve. The second day brought new challenges. German artillery began systematic bombardment of the ridgeline, attempting to suppress what they believed was a Soviet defensive position. Ivan watched from a safe distance as shells exploded among his wooden soldiers, sending splinters and fragments flying. Each explosion destroyed several figures, leaving gaps in the formation that will be visible in reconnaissance photographs. "We need to replace the destroyed figures," Ivan told Kozlov urgently. "If the Germans see the position thinning out, they'll realize something is wrong." Kozlov shook his head. "We can't work during daylight. German observers would see us. And I can't spare men during darkness. We're expecting probing attacks tonight. You'll have to work alone if you want to maintain the deception." That night, while real Soviet soldiers fought off German patrols along the defensive perimeter, Ivan returned to his barn workshop and began crafting replacement soldiers. His hands were healing slowly from the initial 3-night marathon, but new blisters formed as he pushed through fatigue once again. By dawn, he had created 40 new figures to replace those destroyed by artillery. The deployment of replacement soldiers became a nightly routine. Each evening, Ivan would assess the damage from German artillery. Each night, he would build new figures. Each morning before dawn, he would personally carry them to the ridge and position them where destroyed figures had stood. The deception required constant maintenance, constant effort, constant attention to detail. German intelligence continued analyzing reconnaissance photographs, and the mystery of the Soviet position deepened. Oberst Weber noticed patterns that troubled him. The position shows damage from our artillery, but the troop numbers remain approximately constant, he told his staff during a briefing. Either they're receiving reinforcements every night to replace casualties, or something else is happening that we don't understand. A junior intelligence officer offered a suggestion. Perhaps we should send a ground patrol for closer observation. Aerial reconnaissance has limitations. A patrol could get within 500 meters and use optical equipment to see actual details of their position. Weber considered this carefully. Ground patrols were risky. Soviet forces had proven adept at ambushing German reconnaissance teams, but the alternative was continuing to operate on incomplete intelligence. Organize a reconnaissance patrol. Experienced men only. Their mission is observation, not engagement. I want detailed reports on what they actually see at those positions. The patrol departed the following night. 8 German soldiers led by an experienced Unteroffizier named Klaus Richter. Their orders were clear. Approach the Soviet positions as closely as possible without being detected. Observe and document enemy strength and dispositions. Then withdraw. Richter had conducted dozens of similar patrols and understood the techniques for moving silently through hostile territory. Ivan was positioning replacement soldiers on the ridge when his acute hearing picked up sounds that didn't belong. The scrape of boot on rock, the quiet click of equipment. Someone was approaching the wooden soldier positions from the German side. He froze, pressing himself flat against the ground behind one of the wooden figures, his heart hammering. Through gaps between the wooden soldiers, Ivan could see dark shapes moving carefully up the slope. German patrol, maybe 8 or 10 men, advancing with tactical precision. They were still 200 meters away, but they were moving directly toward the wooden soldier positions. In minutes, they would be close enough to see that the figures were wooden. The entire deception would collapse. Ivan's mind raced through options. He couldn't retreat. Any movement might draw attention. He couldn't warn the Soviet defensive line without revealing his position. He was alone on the ridge with 500 wooden soldiers and an approaching German patrol that would destroy everything he had worked for. Then inspiration struck. Ivan reached for one of the wooden figures near him and deliberately pushed it over, letting it fall with a clatter. Then another, then a third. He moved quickly along the line, toppling wooden soldiers, creating the impression of panic and disorder among the troops on the ridge. "Alarm! Alarm!" Ivan shouted in Russian, his voice carrying across the ridge. "Enemy patrol! They're flanking us!" He continued pushing over wooden figures while shouting warnings, creating as much noise and chaos as possible. The effect on the German patrol was immediate. Richter heard the shouts and commotion ahead and made a split-second decision. The Soviets had detected their approach. What had been a reconnaissance patrol was now a discovered infiltration. Staying would mean a firefight against unknown numbers of enemy troops. "Fall back," Richter ordered quietly. "We're compromised. Return to base." The German patrol withdrew quickly, moving back down the slope and disappearing into the darkness. Ivan waited until he was certain they were gone, then allowed himself to breathe again. The deception had survived, but only barely. He spent the next 2 hours repositioning the wooden figures he had deliberately knocked down, restoring order to the formation. At German headquarters, Richter reported his patrol findings to Oberst Weber. "We were detected before we could get close observation. The Soviet positions are actively patrolled, and their security is excellent. We heard alarm calls and significant troop movement when we approached." Weber marked the report in his intelligence log. The Soviet position at Tukums was not only reinforced, but also well defended and alert. Any attack would face determined resistance. He recommended to General Hartmann that the planned assault be delayed indefinitely until the tactical situation became more favorable. Hartmann accepted the recommendation, but with growing frustration. "We're being held up by one Soviet position. Meanwhile, their main forces are establishing stronger defensive lines to our east. Every day we delay, here's a day they improve their positions elsewhere. But I won't send my men into a meat grinder against an unknown enemy strength." On the 4th day of the deception, the situation changed dramatically. Soviet reinforcements, real reinforcements this time, began arriving at Tukums. 2 battalions of fresh troops with armor support moved into positions around the crossroads. Major Kozlov found Ivan working on yet another batch of replacement wooden soldiers. "You can stop now," Kozlov said, his voice carrying a note of genuine respect. "Real soldiers have arrived. Your wooden army served its purpose. You gave us the time we needed, and now we have actual strength to hold this position." Ivan looked at his creation. The wooden soldiers that had held back an entire German regiment through nothing but illusion and careful positioning. For days they had stood their ground, surviving artillery bombardment, reconnaissance flights, and ground patrols. For days it had allowed Soviet forces to establish positions that would now genuinely hold against German attack. "What happens to them?" Ivan asked, gesturing toward the wooden figures on the ridge. Kozlov smiled. "Leave them. Let the Germans keep worrying about them. Mix them with real troops, and the Germans won't know what's real and what isn't. You've created confusion in their intelligence, and confusion is a weapon as valuable as bullets." The wooden soldiers remained on the ridge, now interspersed with real Soviet positions. German reconnaissance continued photographing the area. Analysts continued trying to determine actual enemy strength, and commanders continued hesitating to commit forces against what appeared to be a heavily defended position. By the end of the first week, German frustration with the Tukums situation had reached critical levels. General Hartmann convened a staff meeting to reassess their options. Intelligence reports remained contradictory. Aerial reconnaissance showed significant Soviet forces, but ground patrols reported detection and withdrawal before gaining clear observation. The numbers didn't add up, but no one could identify why. "I propose we commit artillery to a sustained bombardment followed by reconnaissance in force," suggested the operations officer. 2 companies advancing with armor support. "If the Soviet position is as strong as intelligence suggests, we'll know quickly. If it's weaker than estimated, we can exploit the breakthrough." Hartmann agreed, reluctantly. The reconnaissance in force was scheduled for the following morning. 200 German soldiers with tank support would advance on Tukums, prepared either to break through weak defenses or to withdraw if they encountered expected Soviet battalion strength. It was a calculated risk, but continuing to sit idle while Soviet forces strengthened their positions elsewhere was strategically unacceptable. At Tukums, Major Kozlov received intelligence reports about the planned German attack. His reinforced position could now hold against the German reconnaissance force, but casualties would be significant. He found Ivan in the barn, preparing to dismantle his workshop now that the wooden soldiers were no longer needed. "The Germans are coming tomorrow," Kozlov informed him. "A strong probe with armor. We'll stop them, but it will cost us. Your deception gave us the time we needed, Ivan Petrov. Many men will live because of what you built." Ivan nodded slowly, accepting the gratitude but feeling the weight of what was to come. Tomorrow, real soldiers would fight and die around positions where his wooden soldiers stood. The illusion would finally end, but not before it had achieved its strategic purpose. That night, Ivan made one final modification to his wooden army. He moved among the figures in the darkness, adjusting positions, creating what would be his final contribution to the deception. He positioned wooden soldiers to make the Soviet lines appear even stronger than they were, forcing the Germans to concentrate their attack on specific sectors where real Soviet troops with anti-tank weapons waited in ambush. Dawn brought the German attack. Artillery opened up at 6 o'clock hours, a thunderous bombardment that lasted 30 minutes. Ivan watched from a safe position as shells tore through the ridge line, destroying dozens of his wooden soldiers in explosive fury. But many survived, standing amid smoke and debris like ghostly sentinels. At 6:45, German infantry and armor began their advance. From 3 kilometers away, they could see Soviet positions, the mix of real soldiers and wooden figures creating an impression of significant defensive strength. The German advance slowed as commanders assessed what they were facing. Tank commanders reported observation of defensive positions that appeared heavily manned. Infantry commanders called for artillery support before proceeding. The pause was exactly what Kozlov needed. His real soldiers held their fire, maintaining discipline, letting the Germans advance into carefully prepared kill zones. The wooden soldiers continued their silent duty, standing motionless where Ivan had positioned them, drawing German attention and weapons fire while revealing nothing about the actual defensive arrangements. At 800 meters range, German forces began taking fire from Soviet anti-tank positions. 2 tanks were hit immediately, brewing up in flames that sent black smoke billowing across the battlefield. German infantry dug for cover, pinned down by machine gun fire from positions they hadn't identified in their reconnaissance. The battle lasted 3 hours. German forces probed the Soviet defenses repeatedly, each time encountering resistance that seemed disproportionate to what they believed they faced. What they couldn't know was that many of the soldiers they were observing and firing were wooden, that Ivan's deception was still working even in the midst of actual combat, creating confusion about where real Soviet strength was positioned. By mid-morning, General Hartmann made the decision to withdraw. The reconnaissance and force had revealed that Tukums was indeed heavily defended, that assaulting it would require significantly more resources than he had available, and that the strategic value of the position didn't justify the cost. German forces pulled back, and the crossroads at Tukums remained in Soviet hands. Oberst Weber was examining battle damage assessment reports when a peculiar detail caught his attention. Forward observers reported that some Soviet positions that had been taking fire showed no casualties, no movement, no response whatsoever. These positions had absorbed artillery and machine gun fire without any visible reaction. Either the Soviets had extraordinary discipline or something else was happening. "I want to examine those positions personally once we establish control of the area," Weber told his assistant. But the withdrawal order came before that examination could occur. The mystery of the unresponsive Soviet positions would remain unsolved. In the Soviet-held territory, Ivan walked among his wooden soldiers in the aftermath of battle. Perhaps 200 of the original 500 remained standing. The rest had been destroyed by artillery, gunfire, or simply knocked down by concussion from nearby explosions. Those that survived bore scars, bullet holes, shell fragments, charred sections from nearby fires. They looked like veterans now, battle-worn and weary. Kozlov found him there, standing among the wooden figures with an expression that mixed pride and melancholy. "The Germans have withdrawn," the major reported. "They're abandoning their attack on Tukums entirely, redirecting forces to other sectors. Your wooden army has won a victory without firing a shot." Ivan touched one of the wooden soldiers, feeling the rough pine was beneath his fingers. They were never meant to fight, just to stand and be counted. Sometimes that's enough. Word of Ivan's deception spread through Soviet military channels, reaching higher command levels. The story of the Carpenter who held back a German regiment with wooden soldiers became a morale-boosting tale shared among troops. Official recognition came in the form of commendation and a modest medal, presented to Ivan at a small ceremony at Tukums. The wooden soldiers themselves became something of a legend. Some were collected by Soviet soldiers as souvenirs. Others were left standing on a ridge as monuments to an unusual victory. Ivan retrieved several to keep in his workshop, reminders of 3 desperate nights when his carpentry skills became weapons of war. After the war, when historians examined German military records from the Latvia campaign, they found repeated references to the strong Soviet defensive position at Tukums that had delayed Wehrmacht advance in October 1944. Intelligence assessments estimated Soviet strength at the position as 1 full battalion, 500 men, based on area reconnaissance and observation reports. The German commanders never learned that most of those soldiers were wooden, created by a single carpenter working 3 nights. Ivan Petrov returned to his carpentry trade after the war, rebuilding his shop in Riga and creating furniture, cabinets, and church altars as he had before. He rarely spoke about his wooden soldiers, and when he did, it was with characteristic modesty. I built 500 figures from pine wood. The Germans saw what they expected to see. War is often about perception rather than reality. Military strategists who later studied the Tukums deception classified it as one of the most successful tactical deceptions of the Eastern Front. The principle was simple: create the appearance of strength where actual strength was lacking, then maintain the illusion long enough for real strength to arrive. Ivan's wooden soldiers had accomplished precisely that, buying time that saved thousands of lives. A small museum in Riga today displays 3 of Ivan's original wooden soldiers, preserved and mounted with explanatory text describing their role in the Tukums deception. Visitors often express surprise that such crude figures could have fooled German intelligence. But warfare historians understand the principle: at sufficient distance, with appropriate positioning, and against an enemy expecting to see reinforcements, simple wooden silhouettes became convincing enough to change tactical calculations. The story serves as a reminder that warfare is not only about weapons and soldiers, but also about perception and psychology. 500 wooden soldiers convinced a German regiment to retreat not through combat effectiveness, but through the mere suggestion of combat effectiveness. A single carpenter working 3 nights created a defensive position that accomplished what an actual battalion might have struggled to achieve. Ivan Petrov passed away in 1967, having lived long enough to see his wooden soldiers become a footnote in military history textbooks. His contribution to the war was modest compared to the soldiers who fought and died in combat, but it was no less significant. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from those who fight, but from those who make the enemy decide not to fight at all. Deception in warfare can be as powerful as any weapon, and sometimes the most effective soldiers are the ones that never existed at all. Ivan Petrov's wooden army proved that ingenuity, determination, and 3 nights of desperate carpentry could change the course of a battle. If stories of unconventional warfare and the people who fought with their minds rather than guns fascinate you, subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories from history's most creative military deceptions.